Shocking moment. Jasmine Crockett kicked off Jimmy Kimmel in epic live TV. The stage lights dimmed on Jimmy Kimmel Live, setting the mood for an unforgettable night. The studio buzzed with the energy of a divided audience, a tension-filled air hanging heavily over the crowd. This was not going to be a typical late-night talk show. Jimmy Kimmel, with his quick wit and sharp humor, was prepared to engage in a fierce political duel. His guest tonight, Jasmine Crockett, the youngest member of Congress, known for her unapologetic approach to defending her values and her constituents. Crockett, seated confidently in her chair, exuded a quiet yet fierce determination. Her poised presence contrasted with the usual comedic chaos of Kimmel's late-night format. She wasn't there to entertain with jokes or be the subject of Kimmel's snide humor. She was there to defend the truth, to represent the people who elected her, and to stand firm against the media's slanted narratives. Her dark suit gleamed under the spotlight, and her expression remained stoic, though her mind raced, preparing for the barrage of questions that Kimmel would throw at her. The White House had sent her here to make a point to push back against the mainstream media's portrayal of the Trump administration. And Jasmine Crockett wasn't one to shy away from a fight. Kimmel, the man known for his sharp jabs and sarcastic charm, wasn't one to hold back, especially when it came to the policies and leadership of the current administration. His reputation as a comedian who could break down political arguments with humor had earned him a significant audience. But tonight he faced a woman who was more than ready for his mockery. Crockett had already proven herself in the halls of Congress. Now she was prepared to face him on live television. As the show's theme music played, the audience erupted into applause, but a few boos echoed in the back of the studio. The political divide was palpable. While some cheered for Kimmel's usual satirical approach, others were quietly supportive of Crockett. She could sense the clash before it even began. Tonight's guest, Kimmel said, his voice dripping with playful sarcasm, is a congresswoman from the great state of Texas. I hope she brought a map to navigate through my questions. The audience erupted into laughter, eagerly awaiting the witty back and forth they expected. But Crockett didn't flinch. Her calm demeanor stood in stark contrast to Kimmel's showmanship. She was ready for this. Standing up, her heels clicked decisively against the stage as she walked to the chair. With every step, she was sending a message to the audience. This wasn't going to be a light-hearted exchange. She wasn't here to play the fool. She was here to defend the truth. Good to have you, Jasmine, Kimmel said, still smiling, though there was an underlying tension now. Tell me, how does it feel to be the face of the White House, cleaning up after the president's Twitter storms? The laughter that followed was loud and mocking, with many in the audience clearly enjoying the line of attack. But Jasmine Crockett didn't budge. I'm proud to be here, Jimmy, she replied, her voice steady but cutting through the laughter like a knife. I'm proud to represent millions of Americans, not the ones who twist the truth for cheap laughs. The audience fell silent for a split second, and some of her supporters clapped softly in approval. The tension was palpable, but Kimmel wasn't ready to back down. He raised an eyebrow, clearly taken aback by the directness of her response. Oh, coming in strong. I liked that Kimmel said, his tone slightly mocking, but there was a noticeable shift in his demeanor. He wasn't expecting this kind of pushback. But really, don't you ever feel like your job is a bit like comedy? Cleaning up the mess, fixing the president's latest outbursts, Crockett didn't miss a beat. Comedy. No, Jimmy. I leave that to you, she replied, her calm yet firm tone leaving no room for argument. I'm here to speak truth, not perform for an audience. The applause this time was louder as the crowd began to recognize the strength in her words. Kimmel was losing control of the narrative, and he wasn't used to it. All right, Kimmel muttered, trying to regain control. You're here to represent the people. But let's talk about the economy. How do you explain that under the president's watch, prices are rising? Kimmel's question wasn't just a jab. It was a calculated attempt to put her on the defensive. He hoped to land a blow to get her to stumble under the weight of a question about the rising cost of living. The crowd leaned in, eager to see how she would respond. Crockett, however, was unfazed. She sat up straighter in her chair, her eyes locking onto Kimmel's with unwavering focus. Rising prices, Jimmy, are a global issue, not just an American one. But here's what you're not telling your audience: under this administration, we've protected jobs and reduced our dependence on foreign nations, she said, her voice strong and steady. She continued, what you fail to mention is that we've created millions of jobs. We've boosted American manufacturing, and we've made sure American workers don't get left behind. The room fell silent for a moment, and then, like a wave, applause began to build. Her supporters cheered loudly, while Kimmel's usual brand of mockery seemed to falter. Kimmel tried to brush it off with a quick quip. "Oh, I love numbers, especially when they crash," he said, attempting to redirect the conversation back to his usual comedic tone. But the laughter wasn't as enthusiastic this time. The crowd's energy had shifted. "Market fluctuations are normal," Jimmy Crockett continued, her tone steady. "But you know what's not normal? You spending entire shows twisting the truth instead of asking real questions." The applause was deafening now, and Kimmel could feel the tables turning. His usual tactics weren't working. He tried to regain control, but the momentum was no longer on his side. "All right, let's move on then," Kimmel said, attempting to steer the conversation in another direction. "You represent the people, right? But let's talk about the people. Those who are struggling. Higher gas prices, higher food prices. How do you justify all of that?" This was the moment Kimmel had been waiting for, hoping to drive a wedge between Crockett and the audience by highlighting the struggles of the American people. But again, Crockett wasn't rattled. She locked eyes with him, her voice cutting through the noise of the studio. "Struggling, Jimmy. Let's talk about who's really struggling," she said, her words sharp and deliberate. "It's the working-class families, the ones you joke about while they're being forgotten. They're the ones struggling, not the ones sitting comfortably in their studios." Kimmel shifted in his seat, trying to laugh it off, but the tension in the room was unmistakable. This was no longer just an interview, it was a confrontation. And as the conversation raged on, it became clear this wasn't just a battle of politics. It was a battle for the truth. The battle lines had been drawn, and Kimmel, for the first time in his career, found himself losing ground. Jasmine Crockett wasn't there to be mocked or to be reduced to a political punchline. She was there to stand tall, to speak for the truth, and to fight for the American people. The clash of ideologies, the sharp words, and the unmistakable shift in the room signaled that this interview would be remembered for much more than just a late-night comedy show. This was a turning point, and in that moment it was clear the truth had found its voice. The applause still echoed in the studio, and the energy was palpable. What had begun as a simple late-night talk show interview was now spiraling into something far bigger. The crowd, initially split between Kimmel's comedic supporters and Crockett's more reserved backers, was now witnessing a very different dynamic. The political battle in the room had become more than just a clash of personalities. It was a clash of ideologies, with Jimmy Kimmel and Jasmine Crockett at the center of it. Kimmel, ever the master of wit and sarcasm, was struggling to regain control of the interview. His usual sharp humor was being cut short by Crockett's poise and precision. She had not only answered his questions, but had turned the conversation into a referendum on the media's role in distorting political narratives. He tried to reassert dominance, leaning forward and flashing his signature grin. Okay, let's pivot a bit. We've talked about jobs and the economy, but let's talk about something else. The president's behavior, his Twitter rants, his divisiveness. How do you reconcile that with the office he holds?" The question was designed to provoke, to get a reaction from Crockett, something that could be spun into a headline. The audience held its breath, sensing that Kimmel was going to press hard now. This was the point where politicians often stumbled, where they faltered in the face of uncomfortable questions about their leader's behavior. But Jasmine Crockett, ever calm and composed, did not flinch. She didn't hesitate for a second before responding. "You want to talk about the president's Twitter, Jimmy? Let's talk about how the media has weaponized every word he's ever said. Every tweet is twisted, every statement spun into chaos. The real question is, why does the media continue to distort everything he says? You're more interested in creating a narrative than reporting the truth." The words landed with precision, causing a ripple of applause from her supporters in the audience. The sharpness of her reply cut through the tension in the room. Kimmel, who had hoped to land a decisive blow, found himself caught off guard. He expected her to stumble under pressure, but instead, she had turned the tables. He leaned back in his chair, trying to mask his discomfort. "So, you're blaming the media for everything?" "How convenient," Kimmel replied, his voice tinged with sarcasm. "It's easy to deflect responsibility, don't you think?" Crockett's gaze never wavered. "Blame no, Jimmy. I'm not deflecting responsibility. I'm pointing out the hypocrisy. You and the media love to pick apart every word, every action, to create a narrative that suits your agenda. But when we point out the truth suddenly, we're the ones who are divisive." The crowd was reacting now louder than before. Some were clapping, while others, less thrilled with her response, shifted uneasily in their seats. Kimmel, still trying to keep things light, attempted another jab. "So you're saying we're the problem? Not the guy who can't seem to stop tweeting about anything and everything." Crockett's voice remained steady, but there was a fire behind it that was hard to ignore. "What I'm saying is that there's a bigger issue at play here, Jimmy. The president's tweets are one thing, but they don't represent everything. What does represent this administration are the policies that have lifted people up. The jobs we've created, the industries we've revitalized, and the global challenges we've faced head-on. That's the story, Jimmy. Not the circus you're trying to turn it into." Kimmel's face twitched. This wasn't going as he had planned. He tried to regain some of the lost momentum. "All right, I hear you. But let's talk about something that affects people right now, healthcare. How do you justify the fact that millions are still struggling to get affordable healthcare under this administration?" The question was loaded, but Crockett, with a calm breath, prepared to strike back. "You want to talk about healthcare? Jimmy, fine. Let's talk about how this administration has lowered prescription drug prices for seniors, how we've worked to expand access to healthcare in underserved communities, and how we've made sure that people aren't held hostage by big pharmaceutical companies. Is it perfect? No, but we've made progress." The audience was once again divided. While some applauded her assertive defense of the administration, others remained quiet, unsure of where to place their allegiance in this battle of words. But Crockett wasn't looking for applause. She was there to make her case and make sure the truth wasn't obscured by Kimmel's sharp humor. Kimmel, growing increasingly frustrated, tried to push back. "Progress? Really, you want to talk about progress? What about the millions who still can't afford basic medical care? What about the millions still without insurance? How do you justify that?" Crockett leaned forward, her eyes narrowing. "What I justify, Jimmy, is the fact that we're actually doing something about it. We've fought to protect pre-existing conditions, and we've worked to bring down costs for millions of Americans. We're addressing the issues, but the truth is, no administration can fix everything overnight, especially when we're constantly fighting against a biased media narrative." The tension in the room was palpable. Kimmel, who had prided himself on his ability to control the conversation, was beginning to realize that this wasn't going to be as easy as he had thought. He was used to confronting political figures who would back down, who would crack under pressure. But Jasmine Crockett wasn't that kind of politician. He sat back, exhaling deeply, trying to regain his composure. Okay, let's take a step back. You say we're all about narrative. Well, what about your party's narrative? You're a congresswoman, right? But your party has a track record of pushing for policies that seem, well, let's just say not exactly in line with the average American voter's needs. Crockett raised an eyebrow, her voice calm but deadly in its precision. Not in line with the average American voter. Let's talk about how the Democrats fought for universal health care, affordable college education, and fair wages. If you want to talk about policies that truly benefit the people, you need to look beyond the sound bites and see the bigger picture. The truth is, Jimmy, people are hurting, and our job is to fix the system, not perpetuate it. The crowd was erupting now, and Kimmel, visibly shaken, tried to regain control. But it was clear the audience was no longer on his side. His usual smirk had faded, replaced by a look of confusion and frustration. He had been expecting a typical political battle, but instead he found himself up against someone who wasn't just defending her party's policies, she was taking him on head-on. Trying to steer the conversation away from the political battlefield he had lost, Kimmel attempted to make one last jibe. "All right, Jasmine, let's move on to something a bit more light-hearted," he said, but the crowd was no longer interested in his attempt to shift gears. Crockett wasn't here for jokes or games. She wasn't here to be mocked or reduced to a caricature. She was there to deliver a message. And the message had already been sent loud and clear. "You want to be light-hearted, Jimmy." "Sure," she said, standing tall, her eyes never leaving his. "But if you're going to keep pretending this is all just a game, then maybe you're not the one who should be asking the questions." The studio fell silent, and for a brief moment, Kimmel's usual quick wit had been replaced by the sharp sting of reality. He wasn't just up against a young politician, he was up against a woman who had come to fight for the truth. And the truth, as the audience now knew, was that Jasmine Crockett wasn't going to let him or anyone else twist it. The tension in the studio was palpable. What had started as a light-hearted late-night interview with Jimmy Kimmel, prepared to use his usual sarcasm and wit, had spiraled into an intellectual and political showdown. Jasmine Crockett had not only stood her ground, but had deftly turned every one of Kimmel's barbs back on him, exposing the flaws in his arguments while maintaining her composure. Kimmel, his smile now long gone, was visibly struggling to keep up with Crockett's directness. His usual confidence had evaporated. The sharp, sarcastic comments that usually rolled off his tongue with ease seemed to be failing him now. His attempts to poke fun at the administration were being met with cold, hard facts, and the audience was noticing. "Well, Jasmine, I'll give you credit," Kimmel said, his voice now carrying a note of begrudging respect, though he was still trying to maintain control. "You're not backing down, but let's face it, your party isn't exactly loved right now. You've got a president with an approval rating in the basement, and your party's policies don't seem to be winning any favors with the public. How do you justify that?" Crockett, unfazed, leaned forward slightly. Her calm demeanor remained unwavering. "Approval ratings don't define the success of a country, Jimmy," she replied, her voice steady but firm. "What matters are the results we're getting. Under this administration, we've seen record-low unemployment, job creation, and a resurgence in American manufacturing. You want to focus on numbers. Fine. But let's talk about the ones that matter. Real wages are rising, jobs are coming back, and our economy is growing." Her words were met with a strong round of applause from her supporters in the audience. Kimmel tried to maintain his composure, but the pressure was mounting. He had hoped to discredit her with some of his usual jabs, but she wasn't falling for any of it. All right, Kimmel said, trying to brush off her response. "You're right about the economy, but that doesn't change the fact that so many people are still struggling. Gas prices are sky high, and people can't afford to live like this. Don't you see the disconnect between what you're saying and what people are experiencing every day?" Crockett's eyes locked onto his, unwavering. She wasn't backing down, struggling. "Yes, I know people are struggling, Jimmy. But the real disconnect is the way the media distorts the truth. Prices are rising, yes, but what you fail to mention is that this is a global issue. It's not just an American problem. And you also fail to mention how we're fighting to lower prices, create more jobs, and make America less dependent on foreign countries." Kimmel, clearly rattled, tried to regain some of the control. He leaned forward, his usual smirk replaced with a more serious expression. "Okay, I get it," he said. "You've got all the facts, and you're proud of the policies. But let's talk about something else that's harder to defend. The president's behavior, his tone, his divisiveness. You can't deny that he's created a lot of unnecessary chaos. How do you explain that?" This was the moment Kimmel had been waiting for, the question he thought would finally land the knockout punch. But once again, Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't even hesitate. "Divisiveness, Jimmy Crockett," said, her voice cold but clear. "Let me tell you something. What's divisive is the way the media turns every word into a weapon. What's divisive is how you and your colleagues spin every tweet, every action into something chaotic. The president is standing up for the American people. He's fighting for the working class, for families, for those who've been ignored by the media and the elites. That's what you don't understand. The room was growing louder now. Some cheered, others murmured uneasily, but the energy had shifted. Kimmel, visibly frustrated, but trying to maintain his composure, attempted to shift the conversation again. "All right, fine," Kimmel said with a raised eyebrow. "But here's the thing you keep talking about, how great everything is under this administration. But you and I both know that the president's words and actions don't exactly inspire confidence. The chaos he creates, the way he alienates people, how do you justify that? Can you honestly tell me that it's all part of the plan?" Crockett's gaze never wavered. She stood her ground, unwavering in the face of Kimmel's relentless questioning. "What I can tell you, Jimmy, is that the president speaks his mind. He's not a polished politician who says what he thinks you want to hear. He's honest, and that's what the American people appreciate. We're not here to be politically correct. We're here to fight for results. And that's what we've been doing." The audience responded with another round of applause. This time the applause was louder, more enthusiastic. Kimmel, now visibly rattled, attempted to calm the crowd, but it was clear that the tide was turning. "You're not here to be politically correct," Kimmel repeated, a hint of disbelief in his voice. "Well, that's certainly one way to look at it. But let's talk about something a bit more fundamental. What about the values this administration represents? You're defending a president whose approval is lower than ever. How do you square that with the message you're trying to send?" Crockett didn't hesitate. "We're not here to be popular, Jimmy. We're here to do the right thing. Popularity doesn't win battles, results do. And this administration has delivered results. The American people know that. They see the progress we've made. The numbers speak for themselves." Once again, the audience erupted into applause. This time it was clear that the balance of power had shifted. Kimmel, whose job it was to control the narrative, found himself on the defensive. His usual quick-witted remarks were no match for the steady fact-based responses from Crockett. All right, Kimmel said, his voice tinged with frustration. "You've got your facts, you've got your arguments, but let's talk about something a little more personal. You're a representative of the president. You're out there every day defending policies that, let's be honest, don't exactly win you a lot of fans. How do you handle the criticism? How do you stay so composed in the face of so much hate?" Crockett's expression softened, but there was still a fire in her eyes. "Hate. It's not about hate, Jimmy. It's about standing up for what's right. I'm here to fight for the people who don't have a voice, for the ones who've been forgotten. And I'm not going to let anyone silence me. I've been in the fight for a long time, and I'm not backing down now." The applause was deafening. Kimmel, now visibly defeated, could do nothing but sit back in his chair. The balance had shifted completely. This wasn't just an interview anymore. It was a confrontation, a battle for the truth. And in that moment, it was clear Jasmine Crockett had won. The tension in the studio was undeniable. For the first time in his late-night career, Jimmy Kimmel was visibly shaken. His usual comedic sharpness, his ability to twist words and control the narrative, had been neutralized by Jasmine Crockett's unwavering composure and fact-driven responses. The audience, once divided, had now rallied behind her. Kimmel, now caught between frustration and begrudging respect, tried once again to regain control, but the room was no longer his to command. He leaned forward in his chair, his tone trying to mask the discomfort. "All right, Jasmine." Kimmel said, his voice attempting to sound casual, though it was tinged with the unmistakable edge of someone scrambling to keep their footing. "I get that you're standing strong for the president. But what about the everyday Americans who feel left behind, the ones who are struggling with rising prices, with gas costs that seem to never stop climbing? What's your answer to them?" For a moment there was silence. The room held its breath. It was Kimmel's final desperate attempt to make Crockett crack, to force her into defending the indefensible. But Jasmine didn't flinch. She wasn't there to play along with his games. "Jimmy," she said, her voice calm but unwavering, "let's be real here. The rising costs of living are not just an American problem. They're a global issue. Inflation, supply chain disruptions, they've affected countries around the world. But what you fail to mention is that this administration has been working tirelessly to protect American workers, to bring manufacturing jobs back to our shores, and to reduce our dependence on foreign countries." She paused for effect, her eyes never leaving Kimmel's. "You're here cracking jokes about rising prices, but the real problem is that people like you, sitting in your comfortable studios, don't see the real struggle. You've got no idea what it's like for the everyday American who's out there working hard to make ends meet. You want to focus on the temporary issues. Fine, but I'm here to talk about the long-term impact of what we've done. Jobs created, wages rising, a stronger economy. That's the truth." The applause from the audience was deafening this time. It was clear that the room was no longer buying into Kimmel's narrative. The support for Jasmine Crockett had reached a boiling point, and Kimmel, for the first time, seemed unsure of how to proceed. Kimmel, ever the showman, attempted to laugh it off. All right, Jasmine. You've got your talking points, and you're sticking to them," he said, but there was no mistaking the frustration in his voice. "But here's the thing, the president's actions on social media, his constant rants, they're causing a lot of chaos. Don't you think that's a problem?" Crockett leaned back slightly in her chair, her gaze steady, her voice unshaken. "The president speaks his mind. Jimmy, he doesn't hide behind political correctness. And let me tell you something. What you call chaos, the American people see as honesty. They see a leader who's willing to stand up and speak out, not just for the elites, but for the people who've been forgotten by politicians for too long." She paused, her eyes narrowing just slightly. "You want to talk about chaos? How about the chaos that's been created by the media, twisting every word the president says? How about the chaos that comes from people like you, using your platform to distort the truth and manipulate the narrative? That's the real problem, Jimmy." Once again, the room erupted into applause. It was clear that the momentum had shifted entirely in her favor. Kimmel, his usual bravado gone, could only sit there in stunned silence. He had underestimated her, and now it was too late to salvage the situation. "All right, Jasmine," Kimmel said, trying to regain control of the conversation. "You've made your point, but let's talk about something else. You talk a lot about jobs and the economy, but what about the environment? What's your answer to the growing concerns about climate change? How do you justify the president's stance on rolling back environmental protections?" Crockett's response was swift and clear. "The environment is a priority for this administration, Jimmy. But let's be clear, there's a balance between protecting the environment and protecting American jobs. We don't have to choose one over the other. The president's policies are about creating a sustainable future, one where we don't outsource jobs to other countries, and where we invest in American industries that can lead the way in clean energy. We're not going to let the climate agenda be hijacked by special interests. We're going to make sure it's a win for the American people, not just a few elites." The room, now firmly on her side, burst into applause again. Kimmel, his usual quick-witted remarks now failing him, tried one last time to get the final word. All right, Jasmine," he said with a forced chuckle. "I'll give you credit. You're tough. But let me ask you this. How do you sleep at night defending a president who's made so many enemies, who's been mired in scandal after scandal? Can you honestly tell me that you're proud of what he's done?" Crockett didn't flinch. She didn't even hesitate. She sat up straighter, her gaze unwavering. "I sleep just fine, Jimmy, because I know we're doing the right thing. We're standing up for the people who've been ignored for too long. We're working to create a stronger, more prosperous America. And if that offends people like you, so be it." The applause in the studio was deafening. Kimmel, now thoroughly defeated, could only sit back and watch, as Jasmine Crockett, with grace and poise, had turned the tide of the interview. She had dismantled his arguments, exposed his biases, and ultimately won the battle for truth. As the applause continued to echo through the studio, Kimmel, still trying to maintain some semblance of control, muttered, "Well, that's all the time we have for tonight. Thanks for joining us, folks. We'll be right back after the break." But it was clear that the show was no longer his. The battle for the narrative had been won, and Jasmine Crockett had emerged victorious.